Upon reading part 1 of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, there are many things to unpack, starting with the first paragraph. When Zarathustra was 30 years old, he left his home in the lake of his home and went into the mountains. Here, he enjoyed his spirit and his solitude, and for 10 years did not tire of it. But at last a change came over his heart, and one morning he rose with the dawn, stepped before the sun, and spoke to it thus. Nietzsche chose to make Zarathustra 30 years old for two reasons. First, Nietzsche began writing this book between 39 and 41, which is about 10 years after his first published book, The Birth of Tragedy. This is symbolic because he implies that a man at age 30 is still too immature to know anything about the world and himself. This ties closely to my second reason, which is most obvious, and that's a direct jab at Jesus. It's said that Jesus died at 33 years old after spreading his wisdom to the world for 3 years. And Nietzsche never hid his opposition to Christianity. Nietzsche believed the concept of God as an all-powerful and all-knowing being was harmful because it discouraged people for thinking for themselves and taking responsibility for their lives. Nietzsche also believed the original sin idea was used to justify oppression of the weak and the poor, and he believed that there was an emphasis on humility and self-sacrifice in Christianity, and that these values were harmful because they discouraged people from developing their strengths and talents. Lastly, Nietzsche believed that the promise of an afterlife was used to distract people from the present moment and to make them just content with their life. Following this paragraph, we jump toward the middle of part 1. For 10 years, you have climbed to my cave. You would have tired of your light and of the journey had it not been for me and my eagle and my serpent. I can spend an entire video analyzing this quote alone, but I'm going to save that for a future video. But within the first 120 words of this book, we begin to understand the canvas with which Nietzsche is creating his masterpiece. The eagle and the serpent symbolize many things, including good versus evil, heaven versus earth, and intellect versus instinct. The eagle is often seen as a symbol of good, while the serpent is a symbol of evil. The eagle is intellect, and the serpent is instinct. The battle between both represent the conflict between our rational and emotional selves, the side we present to the world and the side we shadow from it, as Carl Jung would say. In the Bible, Genesis 3:1-24, Adam and Eve's fall from grace is foundational in Judeo-Christian religion. It tells the story of how humans came to know good and evil, suggesting that, after being tempted by the serpent, Adam and Eve's eyes were opened. They gained a new understanding of the world and were aware of both good and evil. Isaiah 40:31 says, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Something important to note is both the eagle and the serpent must undergo significant transformations in their lives. The eagle hatches from an egg and has to learn how to fly. Meanwhile, the serpent sheds its skin to grow a new one. We can think of this as Zarathustra integrating his good and his evil. He has reached the metaphorical and literal top of the mountain. He's fully transformed and transcended himself, but not without caution. Behold, I am weary of my wisdom. Like a bee that has gathered too much honey, I need hands outstretched to receive it. I would give away and distribute until the wise among men find joy once again in their folly, and the poor in their riches. For that, I must descend to the depths, as you do in the evening when you go behind the sea and still bring light to the underworld. Like you, I must go under, go down, as is said by man, to whom I want to descend. Nietzsche argues that there's an inherent burden that wisdom carries. We're told that wise men forgot the simple joys of life due to the wisdom they carry. Meanwhile, the poor are rich in spirit. Now, you might be wondering, so what really happens to bees when there's too much honey in the nest? After looking into it, I found out that the bee's nest has to split up. Half of the nest has to stay, and the other half has to find somewhere else to live. According to Nietzsche, much like the person who doesn't offload his wisdom to those eager to collect, it'll produce a mental schism. delusion. And maybe not so unknowingly, Nietzsche is foreshadowing his own life. Having died from apparent insanity, he acknowledged in his letters to a friend, "At times, a premonition runs through my head that I'm actually living a very dangerous life since I'm one of those machines that may explode." It's said for 15 years, not a single reputable reviewer noticed Nietzsche. In his own words, Nietzsche lived a thankless life for the gifts he brought to men. When thought of as human sanity, Zarathustra's wariness paints a macabre future if this duty is not completed. Nietzsche was profoundly aware of himself and the world around him. Part 1 of Zarathustra's prologue provides an urgent question to begin Part 2. What shall Zarathustra do with all his wisdom? In my next video, I'll uncover what he does when he goes down under from the mountain where he resided. Yo, what's going on? Welcome to the end of the video. And if you've made it this far, I just have one special goodie for you. It's an insight that I had while editing this video and preparing to upload it. Part 1 is very in the forefront of my mind, and also coming straight from Greco-Roman philosophy. Plato was the last person I fully dissected, and it seems like Nietzsche is presenting his critique to the allegory of the cave. And it might seem obvious to other people who have been really studying philosophy for a while, but this hit me completely independent of any influence. And I've realized that Nietzsche, his critique to Plato is that people outside of the cave are actually the ignorant ones, compared to Plato's saying people inside the cave are ignorant, and that it takes a philosopher or a savior to come down into the cave, unshackle them, and turn them towards something real, which then only a few select amount of people will actually transcend out of the cave. And that's Plato's imagery. That's how Plato views knowledge and knowing what's good. Nietzsche's complete contrast and opposition toward that is saying he's going to go to the mountaintop, which is even higher, to then go in the cave. And let's not forget that he has to go through a dark forest and then into the cave with his eagle and his serpent, with his good and his evil, right? He has to deal with himself. He has to become one with all parts of himself, and that's where the wisdom comes from. And then he needs to descend down from the cave onto earth rather than transcend up from the bottom of the cave. So even just that imagery itself is a complete contrast. It's a juxtaposition to Plato. And I don't think this was a coincidence, because Nietzsche is very specific with the words he uses and the imagery that he decides to portray. And I find it just so interesting how he can do this within less than 500 words. You know, Plato's argument that not everybody will transcend and become enlightened and get out the cave. Nietzsche is saying that not everybody will become the overman, not for lack of him trying to get everybody to become the overman, because that's what Zarathustra tried to do. And we'll get into that in a future episode, but it's not because Nietzsche hasn't tried. He literally put out books for 15 years. And as I mentioned in this video, nobody noticed him. It's because of decadence, because of material, earthly obsessions, that people aren't trying to improve themselves, not because the knowledge isn't there. It's because they're distracted with something else. So that's all I really wanted to share. I don't want to make this video like twice as long now, but if you enjoyed this little last section, I'd really appreciate a like and a subscribe maybe. I'm going to be dropping more videos like this every single week, like I always say. I'm super excited to continue encountering this book, and I hope to see you in the future videos. Peace out.